Thank you all for attending the session. And I'm going to be speaking a bit bombastic title over here, but it's a little more narrow in scope than what it otherwise suggests. So let me see this works. Yes. So a quick acknowledgement. I am aware that I'm speaking on a topic where there are very good speakers here, thinkers with great finesse and scholarship in this topic. So what I have is a pretty humble offering, but I hope that it can change some ways in which we see this notion of caste, inverted quotes. So, first of all, we see that there's a high decibel pitch that is hurled at Hindus for the last 150 plus years. And here is an example, the latest from Rutgers University that came out with a report in August 2024, where they define caste as something inherited, immutable, social hierarchy, pernicious social hierarchy with discrimination. So we see this. I'm just going to throw a few examples. This is from BBC on what is the caste system over here. You see it divides Hindus. At the hierarchy, at the top, there are Brahmins, Kshatriyas, and so on. The bottom of the heap with the Shudras. Then you see segregated colonies, not shared, not accept food or drink, only married within caste. Many privileges, upper caste, lower caste, regressive, unjust. We see a lot of adjectives over here. Lot of adjectives. That's what I want to show you, highlight over here. A third example, this is from Human Rights Watch. And these people also say similar: discriminatory, cruel, inhumane, degrading treatment, extreme discrimination, segregation, apartheid, modern-day slavery, and so on. So we're seeing a lot of interesting adjectives over here. Even the AI systems, if you go to the AI systems today and ask what is caste and so on, once again, it has internalized all of this nonsense. You have a rigid social hierarchy, hereditary status, social barriers, endogamy, restricted mobility, occupation historically inherited, and so on and so on, discrimination, support from sacred religious texts. So this is the way even AI has internalized it, or the Dalit Foundation, whatever that is. So we see that caste divides people into unequal hierarchical social groups, impure, polluting to other caste groups, and so many other kind of adjectives. And one more as if to label the point. But what I want to highlight is there are a whole lot of distortions over there. So we see that historically we had something in India that is Jati, Varna, Kulam, Gotra. This whole thing has been perverted into something called caste, right? And all of these adjectives that we see, and I call them obligatory adjectives because there are people with a certain motive when they write these things. So you obligatorily see these words attached: inhumane, caste, rigid, immobile, hierarchy, discriminatory. These are the kind of things that come there. And I, as a scientist, wanted to find out why exactly do they say this? What is the source? Surely people are rational people and we have some basis for saying these things. What was the basis of these people who come out to these kind of things? So all of us over here knows that Purusha Suktam is the one that is the inspiration for many of these commentaries on that. But what is important over here is two controversies were generated. First, that although this is there in the Rig Vedam, they say this is a later interpolation, implying that some motivated parties have put in this in Purusha Suktam. That is one. Second, that it is a malicious, discriminatory system. This is the second one. And we always see this pyramid, right? Brahmins at the top, Shudras at the bottom, and with a high and a low. And I asked this question: where did this pyramid come from? Where did it come from? Is there any text that talks about a pyramid and so on? The first thing that we address is a distortion. And we see that Europeans have constructed this notion of a caste where this classical Jati, Varna, Kulam, Gotras perverted into immobile hierarchical caste. We all know Casta, Portuguese, that's where it came from. All these accusations result from this framework, which actually goes back to the Aryan invasion or the migration theory itself using linguistics, where the honorific Arya is perverted into racial Aryan. The geographic identifier Dravida is perverted into racial Dravidian. So caste is positioned as a racial construct of these invading Aryans, and Brahmins have become evil in the missionary atrocity literature. A whole lot of things have come together to make this kind of a thing happen. And I asked this question in this talk: can there be a different way to view the Jati Varna system? Why should the conflict model, I call this a conflict model, why should the conflict model be the only way allowed to look at the Indian social structure? Can there be a different way? That's the whole thesis of what I'm trying to say here. So we all know that this whole notion of caste came from this casta, which is basically the biblical bloodline purity started from Noah and his sons. I won't go into that, no time for that. Aparna said only 20 minutes. So in caste system, we see that caste is viewed as a rigid hierarchical system based on ritual purity and pollution. And when Europeans did this, they had censuses from 1871 that has led to stratification of this caste identities, all inverted quotes. They tailored laws privileging the so-called higher people and restricting the so-called lower caste, whether it's in education, government jobs, and so on. They created something called criminal tribes, which marginalized many communities, driving them to poverty, literally to poverty, and so on. And into this toxic mix, we also had missionary mudslinging at Hindus on the so-called caste system. Construction of untouchability Dalits came out of this. This impacts us to date in social, economic, even political structures of India today, all rely on this framework over here. First of all, where is the evidence for the so-called pyramid and hierarchy? If we take as an example from the text, we have a text called Vajra Suchika Upanishad, which is attributed to Adi Shankara. It's a very philosophical text that asks, so what is special about this Brahmin? What is it about this Brahmin? And we are seeing over here, I'm not going to read all these things. He says, it is not the jiva. Everybody has got a jiva. Every varna has got a jiva. So it's not the jiva that makes a Brahmin special. He says it is not the body. Everybody's got hands, legs, face, feet. We're all the same. So it's not the body. Not the birth. And he's saying that we have got even people like Valmiki, we have got Vyasa, who are all from pretty humble origins. It's not as if you're a high birth, therefore you're a Brahmin. He's saying that. And he's saying it's not the knowledge, because knowledge doesn't make a Brahmin. Even the Kshatriyas and others have got great knowledge and they accomplish great truths. He's saying even that is not special. Not even the karma. Everybody is a karma generator, right? So we all generate similar kind of karma and so on. Not even the dharma. He's saying everybody practices dhanam and other such things. So it's not even the dharma. Then he says finally, it is somebody who has attained self-realization. That is a Brahmin. So what we see here is there's no hierarchy. There's no privilege. It's only a philosophical discussion of what makes a Brahmin over here. If we take a look at the literature, colonial literature, we are finding that this hierarchy is manufactured. For example, in this work, Shivasya Kulam, he has compiled a whole lot of colonial literature, and we see that the acharam and saucha practices of the various communities were graded by the British in some kind of a hierarchy where they put the upper and the lower caste. For example, these are some of the acharam that different communities had. If one community had more achara practices, they were put high. If somebody's got lesser achara practices, put low. So this whole construction of a hierarchy appears to be a British concoction over here, not something that is there in India itself. If you take a look at Ketkar's work, Ketkar has got a seminal work in 1909 on history of caste in India, where he says the same thing, the theory of purity and pollution. Of course, he uses the word, it's status of caste. It is, I guess, his opinion over here. And the rules are when certain castes cannot eat food cooked by another caste and so on. A Brahmin accepts water from another caste is considered as clean in Bengal and so on. So what we're seeing over here is achara practices. Those achara practices have been used to grade by the British into these hierarchies. And so what we can see is that we can debunk the notion of upper and lower. Such a sanction is simply not there in the Indian text. It is something concocted over here. When we say upper, we can ask, upper in what? Upper in wealth? Upper in power? Show me one Brahmin in history who's got wealth or power. It simply does not go together. And lower in what? People are lower in wealth? Well, the Shudras are some of the most prosperous people because they're artisans who produce goods of value. So we have some issues over here. Then can a civilization with Mahavakyas like Aham Brahmasmi, Tattvamasi, can such a civilization be hypocritical and have paradoxical treatment of their fellow humans, saying that you are lower, I am upper, and all of these things? When Advaita sees oneness of everybody, there's a problem over here. So we clearly see that this is not sanctioned. Second is the immobile. Where is the evidence? So immobility is obligatorily thrown at Indians, and we see that there's a fake factoid of rigid immobility. For example, Aryabhatta, spelled with a single T, etymologically was a servant, but had access to the highest wisdom of the Vedangas on astronomy and so on and so forth. The Peshwas, who were Brahmins, adopted the acharam of Kshatriyas, and they worked to fight the Muslims and so on. The Saurashtra weavers from Gujarat, they used to come to the Chola kingdom and trade in cloth year after year. Finally, they settled in the Chola kingdom in Tamil Nadu and they adopted the acharam practices of Brahmins. And so today they call the Saurashtra Brahmins in Tamil Nadu. So in history, even in recent history, this is all recent history, you see that if one wished to join a certain varna, they merely adopt those acharam practices. And within a few generations, you're considered as that particular varna. And we see again, Kate Kerr is talking about how, of course, he positions it as a gain or a loss of status. But the key point is mobility across spectrum. He's saying that so-called caste is degraded by giving up or not giving up the traditional rules of purity. For example, caste is degraded by use of wine, meat, tobacco. In some places, Brahmins have lost caste because they use meat, and so on, polygamy and other such things. So there's some evidences on those things. Then we also see how mobility can be achieved even in Manava Dharma Shastra. Even right over there, we are seeing how there are some rules in marriage where you could have a mobility across varnas taking place after some generations. So even Manu has said that, even Yajnavalkya and Yajnavalkya Smriti is pointing out the rise. Of course, he calls this a translation that I'm not sure how good this translation is. The rise in caste, jati, comes from the 5th or 7th birth and so on. So the point is there is mobility in various Dharma Shastras and so on. And the question to ask is why 5 or 7 generations? I'll address that in just a minute. But one more place, this is by this Johann Bronkhorst. So he's talking about how, for example, Arthashastra, it is talking about mobility. Then we're seeing in Mahabharata, it's talking about mobility. We already talked about Manava Dharma Shastra and so on. And we're also seeing in this Buddhist work, we're talking about 7 generations, how one could accomplish some kind of mobility and so on. So we have seen several literature that is references to mobility in Varna. And one more work, the Sahyadri Kanda of the Skanda Purana, that's talking about the Maharashtrian Brahmins, the Chitpavana Brahmins, who were originally fishermen, according to this event, and how when Parashurama wanted to settle over there, and he found that these fishermen were there, he elevated, I won't say elevated, he made them into Brahmins. So that is what we see over here. So he gave them that status over there. And there's some marquee instances like everybody knows Vishwamitra, Valmiki, Vyasa, we know all of these things. So the question of why 7 generations? Today, science is talking to us about that. For example, we have an epigenetics. We learned that if, for example, your great-great-great-grandfather was exposed to some toxicity, maybe some chemicals or whatever in his environment, that impact can be on future generations, up to 5 to 7 generations. That toxicity could be there in the system. And there are papers that talk about that. For example, this paper is saying at least 4 generations from Cleveland Clinic. It's a paper from there that talks about this. One more paper over here that is talking about how this chemical exposure can harm this. Again, talking about several generations. It's intriguing that Indians also had this notion of you can change your varna in the context of purity within 5 to 7 generations. Just something to keep in mind, a small factoid over there. And about this claim about Brahmins as evil seems to have originated with this Abbé Dubois in his letters on state of Christianity in India. He's revealed his extreme hatred of Brahmins, because he tried to convert the Brahmins in southern India, rather the people in southern India, who deferred to the Brahmins asking them for advice. The Brahmins told him, don't convert. And so he knew they were enemy number 1. And so all of his works, you see there's tremendous hatred coming out over here. I'm not going to read out these snippets, but there's a lot of hatred being directed against Brahmins. And this set the thinking for the civil servants from United Kingdom, rather Britain of those days, when they come, the steamer ships over 3 months, reading all this Abbé Dubois, reading James Mill, things of this nature, and building up these kind of thinkings. So the next thing is, where is inhumane discrimination evidence? Where is this coming from? So we are seeing, for example, in this translation by Jolly, or even this work by Kitka, we are seeing that, for example, dwellings of chandalas, they should be outside the village. And it's talking about impurity, where even a touch would render a vessel impure. So all these things are being positioned as discriminatory and inhumane. Is this the only way of seeing this? Or can there be a different angle, which I am bringing in over here, this public health awareness? There's a great deal of literature on these things, and we got to see this. So we are seeing more of this. Kate Kerr is talking about food, for example. A food may not necessarily be eatable it is impure or polluted. For example, food can be pure, but then if somebody touches that, then it becomes polluted. So he brings about the distinction between pure food, impure food, polluted food, and things of this nature. And there are several of these things. And again, keep this in mind about public health awareness. This is a recent work by a lady called Divya Cherian, who again positions the pre-colonial sources in this notion of purity as a key in isolating contact between communities. So she projects purity practices as ritualistic, implying discrimination as a motivation for practice. For this, we can also see other pre-colonial works. For example, if we see works of selected people like Avayar, Tamil Nadu, 100 BC, Basava in Karnataka, 1150 Karantira, Tukaram in Maharashtra, 1630, if we re-examine these things with a non-Marxist lens, what we are finding is that they are rejecting, for example, Basava rejected rituals, Tukaram emphasized bhakti. So we are seeing these kind of notions, but these are positioned as anti-caste crusaders and things of this nature. So the drishti with which we see these works needs to change, and we might see something different. I didn't do anything. Okay, so all right. Check. Okay, so we are seeing once again in Johann's work. Pause my time. Pause my time. Pause my time. I've tried it. How much more time do I have?
You have already 5 minutes.
Only 5 more? Shoot. Okay, let me race through. And the 5 minutes will make it 20 or 25?
25 minutes for discussion. I know people will ask many questions to you because.
Check.
Can we use the portable mic? They have.
They cut the master. They cut the master. It won't work. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. All right. So one more work by Al-Biruni, where Johann is pointing out Al-Biruni, who's also saying the same thing. He's saying that Indians, 1030 current era, they call all these Muslims who are coming, foreigners, as impure, forbid any connection, whether it's marriage or relationship, sitting, eating, drinking with them, and so on. They think they'll be polluted. So we are seeing these notions of purity, pollution. These are the ideas projected over there rather than a discrimination. So once again, it begs the question, what is this? Is this discrimination or a public health awareness? And when we are on the subject of discrimination, note that Shudras were some of the wealthiest people, not only in colonial times and pre-colonial times, even at the time when Manusmriti was written, he's talking about, Ketkar is pointing out how some Shudras must have been very, very wealthy, including owners of slaves and so on and so forth. They were not prohibited from gaining wealth. So clearly, there's no discrimination by the so-called privileged classes. They talked about Aryabhat already. And this is a work by Sahana Singh. I think he's somewhere in the audience over here. So Sahana had pointed out in an article in India Facts how this notion of untouchability comes just about everywhere in the world. Whether you see China, whether you see Europe, France, India, Japan, in an era before flush toilets, there was need for carrying the night soil away from all the settlements, and certain people did it. But it's only in India that we see that one community has been highlighted as a model, as a marquee thing of untouchability. But this phenomenon existed just about everywhere in the world. So, okay. Check. Okay, so what we're seeing is the historical view shows public health awareness in the ancient past. This is for my Waves conference in 2022 in New Delhi. I talked about this. I talked of the story of Karkati. Karkati's story appears in Yoga Vashishta. She's saying that she prays to Brahma for a boon. She's a monster who wants to consume people in Jambudvipa. She's ashamed of herself, prays to Brahma. Brahma gives her a boon. She says, what do you want? She says, I want to become so small like a Suchi. Suchi is needlehead. I want to be like a needlehead and enter into people through their nostrils, eyes, and go and affect their, eat them up from their heart, and so on. So, and she only wants to eat people who are intemperate, given to drinking, gluttonous, and eating at untimely intervals, who dwell in unhealthy places, and who do not follow the Dharma Shastras. Those are the people she wants to eat. Even a child will say, this seems to be encoding the germ theory over here, that hygiene and so on and so forth, right? So that is what we see in the story of Karkati. And this is not surprising because the rishis lived in India, where every year when monsoon comes, waterborne diseases will be there. We'll have cholera, typhoid, malaria, and smallpox. All of these things would be there. Rishis would have seen entire villages getting wiped out and asked, why is this happening? And in their drishti, they are seeing that there are invisible agents causing these things and come about with prescriptions. It is not supernatural. It is something logical that would come about this, that we are seeing the stories using hygiene as a metaphor, and it's got these kind of things. We are seeing in the British accounts, for example, Hoswell in 1767, he's talking about how inoculation has been performed with the Brahmins in Bengal area. One more work in Asiatic Journal where this man is talking about how Hindus practice inoculation as well as variolation from human subjects or inoculation from the pox of a cow. Both were practiced in India, and he's even saying how this whole thing was practiced. Moving forward, one more work in Asiatic journals talking in Odisha, how on a certain day, 200 people have assembled to be given this cut. So what it is showing to us is that there is knowledge of public health. There is knowledge that everybody needs to be inoculated for the village to be saved. And there's also knowledge that Brahmins were the ones doing this kind of activity. So what we're seeing, observation is that the British records are saying Brahmins are conducting the inoculation. This does not fit the conflict model. Dharampal, who I not addressed here, says Brahmins taught students of all jatis. This does not fit the conflict model. The Vedanta view of Varna, that also does not fit the conflict model. Historic personalities we talked, mobility across spectrum does not fit the conflict model. Achara and Saucha practices that define mobility. This also does not fit the conflict model. Conflict model is oppressor, oppressed, that is pushed by the missionaries, by the colonial people, by the socialists, Marxists, and so on. Dominant way we see ourselves as caste. I'm rejecting all of those things based upon the evidences I just shown you over here. And to show you a deep history understanding of epidemics, if we go to Shushrata Samhita, Shushrata himself is saying epidemics can happen. And he's saying that maybe it's a monster, a demoness, remember Karkati, or maybe it's a pollen of poisonous flowers, grasses wafted by winds coming to an entire town, village, and so on and so forth. And he's giving some recommendations. Don't use defiled water, vegetables, and when the epidemic breaks out, leave that place, go. So clearly there's understanding of that. I'm done. Just give me a couple of minutes over here. So I'm proposing that the model of public health instead of oppression. In medieval India, we know kings invited Brahmins to settle in their kingdoms because the Brahmins would start an agraharam that use Vastu Shastra and say, you live here, you live here, you live here, and so on and so forth, promptly positioned as discrimination. But what we're seeing is there is an understanding of occupational biohazards that has led to segregation of communities in Vastu Shastra. For example, the weaver, it's not like the modern factories today, but it's a hut kind of a situation where he's breathing cotton fibers day in and day out, getting respiratory illnesses like pneumonia, TB, and so on. He gets some immunity, his kids get immunity, his child gets immunity, his wife and his community. Others don't have that immunity. Similarly, if you're an ironsmith or a goldsmith, you have respiratory issues, you're a farmer, you have sort of corona soil complexes, you're a butcher, you've got E. coli and other pathogens. So understanding this, they segregated the communities. And then this classic work by Angus Maddison that is showing India was pretty prosperous over time. And the obvious common sense question to ask is, can an oppressive, regressive society have been so prosperous? How can you have had a conflict-free society being so prosperous if one community was putting down the other community and things of that nature? Clearly, common sense defies common sense. So that's my bottom line. I think I've run out of the thing, but my key over here is that classic Vastu Shastra that separates the jatis reflects understanding of occupational biohazards for separation for public health. Now, in this whole picture that I painted for you here, the people or community with the least immunity are the Brahmanas. Brahmanas wake up in the morning, ritual bath, Gayatri Japam, and say Rig Veda all the way till evening, eating simple foods, just rice and gruel and things of this nature. They have the least immunity. Therefore, the acharam and saucha practices are maximum on them. If you touch somebody of this community, have 2 baths. If you touch that person, have 1 bath. And so on and so forth, because Brahmins are important in the ecosystem of economics over there. They're important. So the saucha practices are maximum on them. And these have been viewed today with the drishti of communism into these things. So achara, saucha practices evolved to enforce hygiene for you to public health. I've shown evidence, Yoga Vashishta. I didn't talk to you about Ayurveda, colonial records. A prosperous society, no conflict, cohesive demolishing the trope of oppressive society. So the model of public health as a driver of Saucha practice is a far better evidence-based fact than the conflict model of oppression and discrimination that is got from discredited racial theories. I think I will stop over there. That's my summary. So thank you very much.